Hello, Adam.
Hi, Georgie.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you too.
Yeah, so we'll usually just have a bit of a chat to begin with until people start joining us. And then we'll start talking about your experiences, obviously, and then anybody can ask questions as they come along. So, but we know each other anyway, don't we?
We do. We've known each other for a good few years now.
Yeah. I forgot to ask you if you're happy about mentioning that.
Absolutely. No problem whatsoever. And I'm sure people who are coming to the conference later in the year, they'll see me there as well.
They will, absolutely. So basically, you support us with our social media. So all the lovely images and memes and reels that go out, you've put on. You've developed them.
I do.
And it was really, I think it was important for us to actually, to have you on board, because you've been going through your own journey. You've been following everybody else anyway in this field and know what it's all about. So it was so much nicer having you on board, who really has a good understanding about all this. And I think that's probably helped you along the way as well.
1,000,000%. Yeah, 1,000,000%. And it's something, as you were saying, because you've got that personal connection, having lived experience, it means that much more to you when you're actually creating content within this field, because you've got your own experience of it, and it means something important to you. And this approach, for me personally, has helped me get better. So it's even more important. It's actually hard to put into words how important it is. And that's why I feel really passionately about doing it and creating content for SIRPA and that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that's been wonderful. And much easier for us, because otherwise we always used to find all the content and somebody else would post it. But wonderful that you know all this, and wonderful that's all helped in your own journey as well. Anyway, we've got people starting to join. So if you'd like to say hello and pop in the comments, then do say hello. Otherwise, I think what we'll do is we'll start with your backstory, Adam, and then as people join, they can ask questions. But anybody can just pop in and say a comment, say hello, tell us where you are, and ask a question. So where did it all begin, Adam?
A long time ago. I was thinking about this actually earlier this morning, how long ago it all began. It was 16 years ago that I first started developing symptoms of what we now know to be a sort of mind-body syndrome. At that time, though, I just assumed I had a really bad flu that didn't go away. And this was reinforced by several GPs. And I got so many, over the 16 years, I got so many different diagnoses. I've kind of lost count, to be perfectly honest. And it was when I was at uni. I just got back from traveling, had probably the best summer of my life up until that point, going into second year, and I got some sort of infection at the time, was very, very ill, sore throat, fever, headache, diarrhea, all sorts of gastro problems. And it just didn't shift like a normal cold or flu would shift after a week or two. It just didn't. And I kept going to see my GP. We didn't really know what was wrong. And then my mum said to me, I wonder if you've got chronic fatigue syndrome. Now, I'd never heard of chronic fatigue syndrome. I was 18, 19 at the time, I think. So I had no idea. All I knew was that a couple of weeks before, I was fit and healthy, playing football every week for my university, and now I couldn't even get out of bed. So there was a lot of anxiety around it. I felt a lot of guilt because I couldn't go out with my friends and have fun. Obviously, uni, when you're at uni, you're supposed to go out on loads of nights out and make loads of friends and stuff like that. So I found that incredibly challenging, and the lack of a solid diagnosis or treatment was really quite worrying, quite scary at the time. So for those 2 years at university, I don't know in hindsight how I got through, because I had to spend a lot of time in bed. I'd say after about 4 months, that was when the chronic pain started. So I had these classic flu symptoms, the fever and that kind of thing. Eventually that started going away, but it was replaced by chronic pain and other somatic symptoms, migraines, regular sore throats, multiple joint pains, brain fog was another big one. And in hindsight, when I sort of look back, it makes me realize that whenever a symptom would go away, it would always be replaced by another symptom. And looking at that from a mind body perspective, it really makes sense now. It's sort of like almost like a symptom imperative, something comes along, it goes away, and you're like, great, but then, you haven't actually got to the root of the problem effectively.
Did you ever wonder why that was happening at the time?
Yes, I did. And I just looked at it through a lens of frustration. It always felt like a sort of one step forward, two steps back.
Yes.
So the second I was making a bit of progress, immediately something else comes along. And once university was done, I tried my hand at full-time work. That really didn't last very long because I was so ill. I probably had about 25, 30 symptoms on a daily basis at that point. Every symptom you could think of. And living in London at the time, I was trying to do the commute from West London to Central London. Anyone who's done that London commute will know how horrific it is on a day-to-day basis. And I think a lot of what I struggled with at the time around that period was people just didn't believe me. They thought I was making it up. And even my mum at the time didn't really understand what was going on. Around that time, I got diagnosed with glandular fever just because I had positive antibodies, but that could have happened years ago. I think if you get glandular fever, you test positive for like the rest of your life because you've got the antibodies to it. So the doctor was like, oh, you tested positive for this. And I was like, great, what's the treatment? He's like, there is no treatment. And I was like, great. And I think it was around that time that I was in my early 20s and I really started developing not just the physical symptoms, but also it was really affecting my mental health at the time because, a young guy in his 20s can't work, can't socialize. At my worst, I couldn't even hold a conversation for more than 5 minutes without having to lie down for 2 hours afterwards. It was, because the symptoms would just get so overwhelming, so much pain and brain fog. And it was at that point that the doctors were like, we can't really help you. We just have to hope that it's going to go away. And it was at that point I started looking at alternatives, started going for energy medicine and did a bit of yoga, breathing exercises. And I must say, with the breathing exercises and the mindfulness, that's the first time I felt, albeit fleetingly, some sort of relief of symptoms.
Great, which is a great hint.
Yeah. And at that time, it actually felt like a massive win because that was the first time I'd actually started noticing some sort of change. And I thought, okay, maybe there's something to mindfulness that could get me better. So I did a mindfulness course. I signed up for some subscriptions and I found it helped, but then I'd finished meditating and then within 5 minutes, all of my symptoms would come back again. So I was like, this is good, but it's not a sort of sustainable. It's not a sustainable solution or cure. But at that time, we're talking about 2011, 2012, there wasn't anywhere near as much available resources out there on the internet as there are now. And I was kind of still learning as I went along, reading lots of books, lots of health books and that kind of thing. And then I went to this place called the Optimum Health Clinic, who are based in London. They are a CFS, ME, fibro sort of clinic. And they have a balance, they have like nutrition side and they've also got a psychology side. Initially, I was quite hesitant, as I think a lot of people are in this space around, wait a minute, my mind is implicated in some way in this. I think it's natural to feel a bit resistant when someone suggests that. Because immediately you think they're saying it's all in your head and, you're making it up. And I know that can be a source of PTSD for a lot of people within this community. So I was very hesitant on that side. I did nutrition for 2 years, kept meditating. But their approach to the psychology, I'd say, is quite different to like SIRPA's approach or other approaches in this field. It wasn't very emotionally focused. It was a bit more thought process focused.
Cognitive, sort of, yes,
Yeah,
cognitive.
patterns and stuff.
Yes, yeah.
And I think that with that, it does genuinely help some people. I've seen some miraculous recoveries, but it helped a little bit, but it didn't really, again, it didn't really get to the root of what was causing my symptoms,
Yeah.
which we'll talk about in a bit. So after a while and a lot of money spent, I was like, I've got a little bit better, but still not all the way there. And then I spoke to someone who tested positive for Lyme disease, and I was like, I did get bitten years and years ago, so I'll go for a test. Went for a test that came back positive. So I was like, at that point, I was like, oh, great, okay, so Lyme is the cause of my symptoms.
Yeah.
Which in hindsight seems crazy, but at the time when you're in that and you get a positive diagnosis for something, there might be a treatment for it. You're like, oh, amazing, this has been causing my problems all these years.
Yeah.
So I went down the medical route for 2 years, and herbs, antibiotics, supplements, all of that kind of stuff. It had a very small effect. It had nowhere near the effect that I was hoping for. And,
Right.
for 2 years, I gave it a good go. I really gave it a good go. And after that, and that was very expensive as well. I mean, I had to go to America, and extremely expensive. And I wish that hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? In hindsight, I never would have bothered going to America or treating the Lyme, because after learning about the mind body work and coming across SIRPA, and I saw Jim Prussack, SIRPA Practitioner, for some one-on-ones and group sessions. Having learned all of that, it's made me realize that all of this stuff that I did in the past was completely unnecessary.
But it was part of your journey.
Yeah.
It's what you needed to do to get to this point. And I think that's really important, because quite often people are very angry even about how much money they've spent and all the stuff they've done and how long it's taken. And then they start finding it difficult to have any hope, because each time they've had hope, it's been dashed again. And therefore, quite often people just block it because they don't want to raise their hope because they might be dashed again. But it was part of your journey, and maybe you wouldn't have got to this if you hadn't gone that way. You don't know, do you?
That's a very good point, actually. And I think when I did come across SIRPA, and it was at the same time that I came across your book and Alan Gordon's book. So this must have been maybe 2019 or something like that.
Right.
And at that point, I was desperate because I felt like I tried everything, and nothing got me better. And at that point, I was so low. I was like, I'm just going to give this everything now, because I've tried everything else. And it was kind of like my last hope in many ways. I was like, well, if this doesn't work, then, there's no hope for me to actually get better. So yeah, maybe it was just getting to that rock bottom, and getting desperate.
Some people say you have to get to that point before you can then open up and move forward with this. That's not always the case, as we know. That's not always the case. But for some people, yes, they do get to that point, and then finally they come across this and think, well, what else have I got to lose? So good on you for really taking it all on board.
I think as well, like the medical, in the UK and in the Western world, our approach to medicine is, take a pill and it will make you better. And if that pill doesn't make you better, we can't really help you, and we don't know what can help you. And this is why, the work that SIRPA are doing, and all of the other people within the mind body space is doing, is so important, because this is actually what's helping patients with really serious long-term symptoms actually get better.
Absolutely. And it's about looking within rather than searching outwardly for an answer to everything. Although we need to do that to get to the point of, like you did, you tried everything else and then you came across this. But then it is about then recognizing it's not about taking a pill, doing this exercise, doing this. Yes, lots of things are important and movement is important, but that's not going to cure you. And then it's about, okay, let's reflect, let's look within and start working somatically. I just want to reach out to those people who've joined us and just say, if you would like to introduce yourself or ask any questions, then do post something in the comments box and we'll get to them when there's a pause in the conversation. In the meantime, though, we'll Carry on, Adam.
Sure. So yeah, I read your book and I read Alan's book as well. And I don't think I've ever read two books so fast in my life. I think I finished your book in 2 days, and then I
Oh, wow.
finished Alan's in about 3 days. So in about a week, I just powered through both books, and I started journaling. That was the first thing that I started doing.
Yeah.
And that was incredibly powerful, I found. So I literally wrote down all of the most significant events in my life
Yeah.
up until this point, and I just wrote everything that came into my head. I just got it down onto paper, and it ended up taking pretty much a whole notebook, like an A4, like this kind of like notebook, A4.
Wow.
And I just didn't stop writing, and the symptoms were actually getting a lot worse sometimes when I was doing it. And to me, that started to show me that the brain is very much implicated in causing and creating my symptoms, because if they weren't, my symptoms wouldn't have got worse just by writing about my
No.
thoughts and my feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. And even, fatigue and just eyes closing, it's almost like, okay, we're getting to something. Why would you you're sitting there, why would you suddenly start feeling that you really can't carry on? It's not just pain, is it?
No,
Or
exactly.
problems or whatever, but what a good way to stop you from addressing things, to protect you from having to deal with these emotions, than to stop you from being able to write, for example, if your symptoms increase. To
Yeah,
protect you from.
absolutely. And I'm not ashamed to say it, but sometimes I was literally in floods of tears, writing,
Good.
because
I'm glad you were.
yeah, it's healthy, it's good.
Those
Yes.
emotions.
It was literally things that I suppose I've been repressing for decades. And I suppose, had I not had the understanding around the importance of feeling your emotions, having read your book and Alan's book, I probably would have just repressed it all and just not fully immersed myself in it.
Yeah, and that's what we learn to do.
Yeah. So that was effectively my first sort of dipping my toe in the water in terms of with the mind body work. I'll still do a bit of mindfulness here and there, but the journey from there to actually getting better was really long. And I think it's really important for me to mention that, because quite often in this space we can see miraculous recoveries where people read John Sarno's book and they're better, just off the back of reading the book. In a majority of cases, from what I've seen, that doesn't happen, and it requires a lot more work. It requires, in some cases, journaling, especially for me, but also learning what emotions are, what they feel like, and that they're actually safe to be felt. So in the early days, it does. It does.
To start recognizing the sensations within the body that are showing that there are emotions there, and being able to then learn to feel safe to allow those emotions to come up. So there's a lot involved, as well as looking at, as you will have done, looking at your behaviors, these learned behaviors, the beliefs, personality traits. No, it's not about changing your personality, but it's about recognizing, and it's really understanding it. And then you can change things. You might still tend to be a perfectionist, but it doesn't mean that you have to cause yourself a lot of pressure by going down that route. It's about acknowledging, recognizing these pathways, patterns, behaviors, beliefs, whatever, when they're creating stress. And okay. And that's about developing this more of a somatic awareness, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. No, totally. And, I didn't know what certain emotions felt like when I started this work either, because I was so numb to what emotions were. And that in itself took time to work out. And I remember I'd be sitting down, I'd be like, I know I'm feeling something, but I don't know what it is. And I don't actually know what anxiety feels like, or fear feels like, or because it had been repressed subconsciously for so long. So that took quite a long time. And, I'd urge anyone listening to this to be patient with yourselves around that. It's normal to, if you've been in this space of not feeling your emotions for decades or years, it does take time and practice. And you need to be kind to yourself and just be like, I'm learning this. It's like when you're trying to learn a bike, you're not going to get it perfect first time. It takes practice. And
being able to do, just to be able to be not dependent on the outcome. So to
Yeah.
be outcome independent, not doing it because if I do this, I can get rid of a pain. And if I
Yes,
do this for a month, then my pain will go, because that puts pressure on. And
it
that's
does.
not what we want to do. And the other thing was about, saying about you didn't recognize some of the emotions. And, what is it? They say that on average, people only can name about 6 emotions, sadness, happiness, whatever.
Hmm.
And the emotions wheel can be really helpful with that, to just start sort of breaking it down and looking at what, for example, frustration can be a type of anger. And that can help. But having said that, it's not about searching. So if you're feeling something, it's more important to sit there and allow yourself to feel it than to actually get frustrated because you're trying to work out what this is, what it's about,
Hmm.
or what's causing it, or what the emotion is. That can then create more resistance to you being able to just let go and allow things to flow.
Yeah, exactly. And the pause, I think it's called, was it pause, breathe, reassure, or pause
Yes,
something reassure? I did a lot of
pause,
that exercise.
reassure.
That's it. Yeah. And I was doing a lot of that in the first 3 months, just to really get a grip of what I'm feeling, how to recognize it, but also, as you were saying, being outcome independent. So, okay, I've recognized that I might be feeling anxious, but if I feel it, the symptom doesn't need to go away. I'm just learning what the emotions are. I'm learning to feel them. The symptom will go in its own time, just about
Yeah.
being consistent with it. And
Mm.
after those it took about 3 months of consistently
Right.
working with this that I
Yeah.
actually first noticed an improvement in symptoms. So it definitely did not
Wow.
happen overnight. It took 3 months just to notice any sort of difference.
And I think the pause, breathe, feel, reassure. I mean, well, I'll put a link to that because we've got a video on YouTube about that. And I think that is not necessarily just a strategy to get rid of or allow yourself to feel an emotion and get rid of a symptom. It's a way to start training yourself to notice what's going on in the body, not the pain, but emotionally and sensation wise. What are you aware of in the body? So that pause whenever you've been triggered, or might be that the symptom has come up, or just when you know that you're feeling angry or you've been triggered in one way, to pause and just actually start noticing, feel what's going on, do the calm breathing, and then reassure yourself. So I think that is a way of teaching ourselves to build our felt sense, really allows us, because then the more we are aware of what's going on, the more we can tune in and then do something about it.
And also the emotional awareness exercise as well, which I sort of took on board later. And I think there's a YouTube video on SIRPA's channel actually with the emotional awareness exercise, which is about 10
Yeah.
minutes long. And I remember I used to just close my eyes and put my earphones in and just listen to that at least once a day,
Right.
for a good few months. And it was not just that, and I think this is important to mention as well. It wasn't just doing the emotional awareness exercise that got me better. It was doing that. It was also doing other things, mind body related, like for instance, you know, observing symptoms without judging. So, some people call that somatic tracking, for instance,
Yes. Yeah.
just observing. And it's almost like, what's the right word? It's just helping calm your nervous system down, because rather than reacting against the symptom, you're just letting the symptom be there, and you're not
Absolutely.
judging the symptom. You're not trying to get rid of it. So the somatic tracking kind of came in a bit later. And I
Yeah.
was doing, the emotional awareness exercises. I was working with Jim as well. And what I found really great with Jim was with his group classes, he will upload an audio each day, which he'll send to you. And it just helps reinforce all of those tools.
Mm.
It just helps you learn it inside out. And I
Yeah.
really
Absolutely.
found that sort of daily practice really, really helpful.
Mm.
And he'd occasionally do like somatic tracking exercises. So you could I'd wake up in the morning, I'd put on a somatic tracking exercise, because I always found my nervous system was at its most hyped first thing in the morning,
Right.
adrenaline pumping, symptoms going a bit crazy. So just
Yeah.
doing a somatic tracking exercise or an emotional awareness exercise
Yeah. Lovely.
really, really, really helped. And doing that consistently.
Yeah.
And I really started to notice it. Probably took about a year and a half to 2 years of using these tools consistently, where I was actually noticing serious progress.
Yeah.
And now I'm kind of, I suppose, year 3 or year 4 even, after coming across SIRPA and Alan's work. And I only really feel like I've got better in maybe like the last 3 or 4 months. So it really does take a heck of a lot of consistency and determination to stick the course with it.
And I think, can we pause there just to read Iri's message as well, which reinforces that. She says, I'm just in awe, Adam, about your resilience and persistence to not give up on yourself while seeking how you could recover, and telling your story will be so helpful and inspiring for others who are struggling, but curious, open and ready for the mind-body approach. You're giving some real pearls of wisdom, how you learned how to reconnect to yourself via your emotions. Thanks, Iri.
Thanks, Iri. That's very kind.
Absolutely, and that's why it's so important. And you were keen to do this, and you were really holding back and only wanted to do it when you're ready. Maybe a bit of perfectionism coming out there, but because you've been working normally for a long time, haven't you? So I think you made that initial recovery and started getting your life back again. But I think it's more that you feel like, okay, now you feel like you can do anything that you want to do. Is that right?
Absolutely. And I kind of felt that, I think I was quite hesitant because, number one, I wanted to be sure. Like, I wanted to be sure that this wasn't some sort of honeymoon period. I wanted to be sure and feel truly robust. And I felt it was really important to get my story across because, as I said, I'm not one of those fast recoverers. It literally took me years. And, you know, I think it's important for people who have maybe been on this journey for a couple of years and they're like, oh, I'm not better yet. You can get better, but it's just about being patient, you know, using the tools. I also adopted a bit of a bottom-up approach as well regarding the somatics. You know, just things like really basic things, just like humming every day is really good for calming your nervous system. You know, I mean, my wife thinks I'm a bit crazy, but you know, sometimes we'll be watching TV and I'll just start humming, and because it really helps calm down the nervous system. It's incredibly powerful. So that's another
integrating all these, like you said earlier, going over it and using them so that really becomes part of your life. I mean, we had a board meeting this last weekend, and there's 8 of us, and Iri was one of them. And we all use these. You know, just because we're practitioners doesn't mean, you know, we're still human beings living, you know, quite a challenging life at times. And it's about this understanding and awareness. And I think this is where, if people have read the book and recovered, they really don't learn an awful lot. If they read a book and they're halfway through the book and they get an aha moment, that's wonderful. But I have also seen people who've then had problems down the line and they go back and do what the book said, or sometimes they haven't done anything that's in the book because they've read the book and the pain's just gone. And they go, oh, that's great. But if you're not keen to really look within and see what the wisdom of the body is showing you, and really learn this stuff, then, you know, doing that is going to help us live a healthier life, isn't it, moving forward? But integrating it into our lives.
Definitely. This is it. You know, with the mind body work, I never use the word cure because it's not a cure. It's an ongoing process. And, you know, I still do mindfulness, you know, usually like once a week, maybe a couple of times a week if it's a sort of stressful period, work wise, or, you know, social life wise or anything like that. You know, as I was saying, I still hum to help calm the nervous system. I'm always sort of listening for if my sort of emotions trying to tell me something. If I'm feeling anxious about something, I just label it. You know, we call it affect labeling, don't we? Where you just literally just labeling the emotion that you're feeling can have such a powerful effect. And it's so easy. You know, I'm feeling anxious right now. It actually makes you feel better.
Yeah. I think that, and acknowledging and expressing how we feel. I think quite often what people will think of, it's about, oh, self-soothing, let's self-soothe, or being triggered, let's self-soothe. That's important, but it's also important to allow ourselves to feel the emotions, to allow those emotions to come through. And like you've said before, journaling can be a really good way to do that. Emotional awareness can be a good way to do that, and then do the self-soothing. But it's not about as soon as you feel triggered, you just go into self-soothing, because that can be almost like repression again.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, you're better, but you're not dealing with allowing, because emotions, they say, pass through the body in about 90 seconds. So we will pass through. And what we're trying to do is feel safe to be able to feel and express those emotions.
Yeah. And I think in the early days of me working, with the mind body work, the self-soothing was very helpful in the early days, because I think my nervous system was so activated all of the time. The soothing really just helped calm it down a little bit. And then once there's more capacity, then learning about what emotions were and how to feel them. And so it kind of worked in that sort of order for me, I'd say. And then I started working with the somatics alongside still with the emotions. So I was using a number of different techniques and tools, because it wasn't one size fits all for me. Found a number of different modalities which kind of worked. And I think the last sort of modality which really helped me get back to where I am now is not caring about the symptoms. Just not caring about them, because you know that they're coming from your brain. Once you know they're coming from your brain, and it's not a physical problem that you've got, your symptoms might be screaming at you, but it doesn't mean you're going to have a relapse, or it doesn't mean you're going to crash. Or, I remember about a year and a half ago, my symptoms are off the scale. But I was like, I don't care. I want to go into town because I want to buy something from the shops. And I'm just going to basically remind myself that I'm safe and allow any emotions that come up to come up. And I managed absolutely fine. And the symptoms were gone by the next day. So it just shows that if we put too much emphasis on meaning but behind the symptoms, it can stop us from doing things we really want to do.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's so true. If anybody's got any questions or points that they want to make, by all means, put something in the comments box. But yeah, I think you say that it's not one box fits all, and that's true. And in fact, it's even depending on where we are in our life or in our week, depending on what's going on, is about having that toolbox, isn't it? And just knowing that actually, at the moment, this is what I need. And that's why practice and really getting to grips with everything, so that you know what helps you at what point. And then you can just dip in and use whatever you find most helpful during those moments.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when I started not getting so bothered about symptoms as well, it really opened up so many avenues and possibilities for me. And, where I live down in West Sussex with my wife, and I moved down here when COVID kicked off. So the lockdowns were happening and stuff. So I hadn't really made any friends, and I was very ill at the time as well. However, once I started implementing the tools on a regular basis, I was like, I want to socialize. I want to make some friends here. And I sort of joined a group, and now we're all really good mates. I actually did my first hike since I got ill. I think that was about 10 kilometers in the South Downs, which is right sort of on the doorstep of where we live. So it was not mountainous, but it was hilly and it was challenging. But everyone felt challenged by it. My friends, they go on a lot of hikes. So they did Ben Nevis last year. They do a lot of hiking, and they were like, yeah, it took it out of us as well. And afterwards we went for a pub lunch. It was fantastic. But the next day, I was doing SIRPA work the next day, and I was fine. Fine. So for me, that's like, well, I must be well, because a not well person would be really struggling the next day or in low pain.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think people often do go into that fear if they do find that symptoms increase for whatever reason at some point. And it's about actually just stepping back. Too much now to go back to where you were anyway, and to actually recognize that fear drives symptoms, and therefore just taking that time to go back through things, looking through evidence lists, go back through what you've achieved, etc. And pretty quickly symptoms tend to settle down. And sometimes, if that's the first time it's happened, you might need to reach out to somebody to help, and just sort of ensure that you understand, that you're putting into perspective, rationalize things. And then once you've done that, things will calm down. If you're stuck in that fear and you're spiraling, that can make it worse. It's just about getting out.
And I think what I would encourage to people watching as well is, I tried to do this myself, self-directed. in the early days of sort of learning about SIRPA and reading Alan's book. But the work I did with Jim was priceless, because I'd always encourage people to reach out to a practitioner, because they can help you spot patterns which you may not be able to spot yourself. And that for me was really, really crucial when I started learning about these patterns that I've been running, which had actually been keeping me stuck. So I'd really encourage people to at least consider seeing a practitioner, because for me, I'm not sure if I'd be sitting here right now doing this success story if I hadn't have got that practitioner support.
And I think, it's just being able to reach out even to peers, but having that practitioner, an experienced practitioner, which Jim is obviously, this is such an unconscious thing, isn't it? You know, everything's unconscious, and we might recognize some things, but working with someone else, even, you know, when we're working as a board, we often buddy up and do some work together. And it's incredible what comes up when you're actually working with somebody else. In fact, I know Iralee came up with something when I was working with her at one point, doing some sort of somatic work. And I went, I hadn't even thought of that. Because it's sometimes about being reflected back to you. And there are blind spots, and it's, you know, they're unconscious, they're repetitive, automatic, and we don't see them. And therefore, that's why it's helpful to work with somebody.
Yeah, it's not, we just find autopilot. Yeah.
Well, I think, is there anything else before we finish? Is there anything else that you feel you really would like to share with people listening?
Yeah, I think probably the most important message I'd like to sort of convey in this success story is, if you've been on this journey for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and you haven't got better yet, that doesn't mean you won't get better. It's just about finding what works for you, being consistent with it, and sticking the course, because you will get there. And, you know, it took me ages to actually accept that my brain was actually controlling what was going on in my body. But when I fully surrendered to that and accepted it, then things started moving in the right direction. And there's so much science out there showing this now as well. There's an abundance of evidence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's important to say here is, fitting in with that, is that it is worth persisting. But having said that, so many people have come to me saying, I've read all the books, I've done all the programs, I've done this, I've done that. And that's when they feel it's more of an intellectual exercise. I understand it. I've had somebody said to me, I could do your job. You know, I know it all. I've read everything. They'd come back with a relapse, by the way. And I just thought, you know, this is not an intellectual exercise. This is not about understanding it consciously. This is so much deeper. And if somebody has read everything, done all the courses on their own, that is such a red flag to me. Just saying, okay, time to come out of your head, come into your body, and then also work, if not work with somebody, maybe, you know, working with somebody with as a case studies, reduced price. But even if it's a one-off appointment with somebody, and everybody offers, almost every practitioner works online and offers free discovery course. Even that in itself can give them a bit of guidance as to how to move forward. But certainly if somebody's stuck, rather than just persist with what they've been doing and searching outwardly for the right tool, the right book, or the right understanding, that's a time to actually pause, reach out to somebody. And like you said, working with somebody like Jim, like Iralee, or many of the others really experienced practitioners that we've got, to just pause and talk to somebody so that they can reflect back, and you can start looking at what might be missing that's stopping you from moving forward.
Yeah. And also just remember, as hard as it is, just try dropping that timeline that you impose upon yourself as well. I know it's really hard and people want to be well as soon as possible, but when you drop that and just forget about the timeline and just say it will take as long as it needs to take, and just go with that, things can start moving in the right direction.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much, Adam. And
My pleasure.
Thank you those listening in. It's wonderful to hear your story, and Iralee's right. I think you're giving some real pearls of wisdom that will really help many people. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.